While I love movies that are grounded in reality and manage to immerse you in a believable setting, one of the things that I find most appealing about storytelling is the ability to transport you into strange, mystical places that could never exist. And I especially love when a story executes something like this so well that you feel like you're waking up from a dream when the credits roll. Being taken out of everyday reality and into a strange and fantastical world is an incredibly appealing idea, but it can be extremely challenging to create something that can accomplish the full immersion in a story like that, since every single element has to come together and be believable enough within the realm that's being established, since this kind of world is so alien. It's hard to do convincingly, and it's even harder when the world that's so otherworldly blurs the lines between our reality and that presented in the story. Panos Cosmatos' 2018 film Mandy accomplishes this feat in vibrant neon, waves of ethereal music, and blood. A lot of blood. And Nicolas Cage being very Nicolas Cage.
It's crazy evil.
Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. Nicolas Cage is an actor who had a really bad reputation for a long time, and in some ways still does in general eyes, because where the man really shines is in weird roles that are often more suited for smaller films that not as many people will see. He's an Oscar-winning actor, and I'll remind you of that every chance I get, because the dude is great when he's got the right role, and the character of Red is absolutely one of those. Mandy's one of those movies that's been floating around the back of my mind since I started making videos, because it's so unabashedly unique, but also because mixed in with the absurdity and brutal violence is this ethereal dreamscape of a story that has fascinated me for years. Written by Panos Cosmatos and Aaron Stewart-Ahn, the film was directed by Cosmatos with this distinct psychedelic style, using the base of a fairly simple revenge narrative on a canvas of flowing cosmos and washy music that makes it stand out among movies with this sort of story. It's a difficult movie to introduce or talk about without getting into details, because it's in the style where Mandy finds its footing, and wrapped up in that is such a compelling package that has made this movie stick around strongly. So let's take a look at this unsettlingly beautiful dreamscape of a movie. But first, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Ever been bored and decided to check the spam folder in your email? As funny as some of these can be, it's unfortunately a result of large companies not properly securing your data, like Ticketmaster, for example, who was recently hacked and the personal data of 560 million users was put up for sale on the dark web. That data includes their full names, email addresses, phone numbers, and even credit card information. We love being scared here, but not like that. Best case, you're getting more spam messages because of it. Worst case, it's fraud, but don't worry, because Ticketmaster said that the hack wouldn't have a, and I quote, material impact on our overall business. And it seems like they aren't doing anything to remedy this. That's nice. These huge organizations will gladly collect your data and store it in their fridge without a lock, which is why you should use Aura. Aura comes through and lets you know when any of your data was breached or leaked out onto the spooky dark web, as well as speedy fraud alerts to give you a heads up if any of that data was used to try and gain access to your credit or bank accounts, and they'll make sure your data is wiped off any data broker website so you don't get inundated with as much spam. They also offer things like transaction monitoring, a VPN, an antivirus, a password manager, parental controls, and identity theft insurance, all of which is included in one app at a price far cheaper than that out-of-print sealed collector's edition Blu-ray you're eyeing. If you use Ticketmaster, you can rest easy if you sign up for Aura, because they'll be sitting behind a curtain ready to hop out with a machete and protect your information. If you want to keep yours and your family's personal data safe, go to https://aura.com/Rocklin and try your first 2 weeks for free. Link is in the description below. Mandy is a story very distinctly split into two parts, with the first half of the movie being a slow-paced vignette of the peaceful life Red Miller and Mandy Bloom have, living in their cosmically cozy home in the Pacific Northwest, reading poetry under an ethereal sky, sitting in a lake that looks so strangely trippy, and philosophizing about the cosmos and what it all means. The movie wastes no time in falling into this otherworldly tone, although not before the opening scene, which shows Red working as a lumberjack. The reason this scene matters quite a bit more than it may seem at first is because the presentation of his working life is really the only scene of the entire movie where it doesn't feel like a dreamscape, and the reason that's important is because it helps to emphasize how Mandy transports Red into another place when he's around her. Here, away from her, it's dark gray and faded green in the woods, but once he comes home to find her working on a new art piece, the light is warm and inviting and soon shifts into these flowing psychedelic colors, and that transition immediately sets up the nature of their deep connection to each other. They live in their own little world in this home, away from everything else, where they just spend time with each other and express themselves artistically. There are many very long, tender moments where they'll talk about something from their lives or ask each other about their favorite planets, all of which is quite revealing of their characteristics, but also do a lot just to further enhance that really otherworldly feel the movie is going for. These moments feel really genuine and intimate, almost like you're peeping in on the quiet moments shared by two people that no one else is meant to see, and it's really alluring. Something that I like about them is that they aren't speaking perfectly, which I know seems like an odd thing to point out, but when they stumble over their words or something like that, it gives a more human touch to these things. And when you're trying to establish a deeper connection between two people, those details go a long way in making that feel more believable, and they really accomplish that with these scenes. There's a lot done to set Mandy up as being a particularly tender and caring person without any violence in her, trying to stay away from intensity because of an abusive childhood she had that we learned a little bit about during a conversation between her and Red.
And then he gave the crowbar to one of the kids, and then each kid took a turning, killing a starling.
We also see her wandering through the woods and stumbling across the dead body of a deer, reminding her of the underlying nastiness the world can show and bringing her back to some of the traumatic memories from when she was younger. I think it's also a way to further emphasize how Red and Mandy see each other as a safe haven from a brutal outside world, as when Mandy wanders away from home and into the woods, she finds this disturbing sight. The incredibly detailed and cozy design of their house is another way that this feeling of security with each other is built on top of, with the place feeling very curated and lived in, like their whole lives are packed away on these shelves. All of these things glue together to create a bond that feels very tangible and deep, which is integral to the rest of the movie after things go south. Speaking of which, lurking within these mountains are a religious cult known as the Children of the New Dawn, spearheaded by Jeremiah Sand, played by Linus Roach, who honestly gives one of the best performances I've ever seen from him. When Mandy is out for a walk through the woods one day, the cult drives past her and Jeremiah is instantly infatuated with Mandy, drawn in by her tender nature and deep connection to the cosmos, and he becomes obsessed with her after that, unable to move forward until he has her, so he tasks Brother Swan, played by Ned Dennehy, to bring Mandy to him as quickly as possible.
I need her now, Jeremiah. Consider it done.
During this scene, when Jeremiah's obsession with Mandy is born, the whole world is bathed in this deep crimson red, reflecting the violence that will ensue as a result of this when things don't go the way Jeremiah wants them to. The color red is the most prominent in this movie, and I'm sure it's no coincidence that our main character's name is literally just Red, but in moments like this, where violence is an inevitability or especially prevalent, the amount of colored lighting is kicked up even further than it usually is to really push that visceral feeling. The visual style in this movie is very much unbound by reality and is instead entirely reflective of whatever's going on during a given scene. One of the more interesting uses of this is when Jeremiah hands Brother Swan the horn of Abraxas, a very Lovecraftian looking horn that can be used to call upon the Black Skulls, a group of bikers who the Children of the New Dawn hire to do their dirty work for them. When we see the shot of the horn, this whole scene just starts flashing this vibrant neon green, a huge contrast from the color palette we're accustomed to by this point of the movie, which I think is a great way of making this feel like something connected to some strange existence outside of the one we're experiencing. It makes it all feel more cosmic. One of the things that I find really fascinating about the way the story and characters in Mandy are presented is that it's not explicitly made clear one way or another if there actually is anything supernatural going on, or if this is more because we're experiencing the story through the lens of people who are consistently taking very high doses of psychedelics and other drugs. The Black Skulls were thought to be responsible for a series of murders, and they used to transport large quantities of LSD for a local manufacturer, but he grew cold on them because of their dark nature and made a batch that just destroyed their brains and whatever humanity was left over, and that's what made them the way they are now. So it's possible that a lot of what we see in the movie is a result of that tainted batch, as well as the other strange substances being consumed, but it's also entirely possible that there's indeed something more cosmic at play here. Perhaps whatever the Black Skulls were given allowed them to connect with some outer, as was theorized by some of the locals after they went through that change. There's definitely some evidence that they aren't strictly human, because there are one or two times where something happens that doesn't seem like it would be possible, like one of them getting stabbed in the neck and still continuing to fight afterwards, or Red hitting one of them with a truck, which sends his car flying. Granted, we can't really trust Red's point of view in terms of reality at this point, since he consumes drugs that he finds in the possession of the Black Skulls, so who the hell knows what's really going on at this point. I love that sort of ambiguity in storytelling that doesn't force you to lean in one direction or the other and instead gives different tangents for you to follow and come to your own conclusions on. I like the idea that whatever the skulls were given opened them up to communicating with something outside of normal human perception, because it's a good blend of both ideas that makes this ethereal blurred line between reality and this other strange world. It could really be either or, but I'm always a sucker for that sort of supernatural ambiguity, so I lean a bit more into the strange mix of both. The children of the New Dawn themselves are incredibly off-putting, always speaking very slowly, like they're needing to remember how to speak English in the midst of whatever strange dream state they exist in. Every time they talk, it's just really off, and the way everyone idolizes Jeremiah is equally creepy, especially since the dude honestly seems like a total dork. I may have gotten a little ahead of myself talking about the Black Skulls in such detail because I haven't touched on the inciting incident that brings Red face to face with them. While Red and Mandy sleep soundly in their bed, they're awoken by an attack from the Black Skulls where we see the payment the children of the New Dawn needed to provide for the job to be done, that being the blood sacrifice of one of their own. Mandy is drugged and brought to Jeremiah, who attempts to seduce her with 70s psychedelic rock and an underwhelming meat pipe. You're gonna need to work on your sales pitch a little more, my dude. Unsolicited dick pics are never a good idea, and doing it in person is absolutely not a step up from that, which he quickly learns when Mandy just starts brutally laughing at his pathetic advances. This scene goes on for a very long time, with him trying to coax her into joining the children of the New Dawn in this life of incoherent oblivion, and there's a really cool section here where he's right up in her face and all the reverb that was on his voice before fades away, making this feel so uncomfortably intimate after how washy the soundscape has been up to this point. His face slowly morphs between his own and Mandy's, so much so that you may not even notice it's happening until it's fully done, which is always one of my favorite sort of effects to see, and here it's done seamlessly and to great effect. It's not just a cool, trippy thing though, it's reflective of how Jeremiah immediately saw them as being these inseparable, inevitable lovers that he feels like he's entitled to, and when she just laughs straight at him, it sets off his anger and shows how insanely insecure this revered weirdo actually is.
Don't you fucking look at me!
It's unfortunately this that puts the nail in the coffin for Mandy, because she's brought back to her home where Red has been bound in barbed wire and he's forced to watch as she's burned alive inside his sleeping bag. Another sequence that feels agonizingly long for the sake of making you feel every little detail and getting absorbed in the atmosphere. It's all in slow motion with the sounds of this horrific act being drowned out entirely, leaving only the droning synths painting a heartbreaking picture of the utter loss of Red's world that's happening right in front of his eyes in this completely senseless, unprovoked, and unnecessary tragedy. It fades from sadness and loss to a more aggressive sound to indicate that as soon as Brother Swan lit his match, he was igniting a flame inside of Red that won't stop burning until he's had his vengeance. Now, Nick Cage, unfortunately, has a reputation for being a bad actor. Certainly less so for fans of genre films, because if you're into this kind of thing, you'll know that he's actually an amazing actor and he just needs the right role. And if you want to show someone what he's capable of, the scene that follows Mandy's murder where Red goes into the bathroom and retrieves the bottle of white rum that I also have under my cupboard, chugs the whole thing and just stands there screaming in utter rage and despair. This would be a great moment to put on to prove your point. We get two scenes back to back that do a great job of portraying the two feelings going on inside of Red here, where before he heads inside, he holds the ashes of the love of his life as the final embers fade away and her body crumbles into the wind, and then we get this absolutely manic, rage-filled outburst. I seriously can't overemphasize how much I love this utterly raw and heartbreaking scene, and it marks a huge turning point in the movie. Up to this point, the pacing has been very slow, with a lot of slow motion shots that linger for a long time on scenes that just crawl along at a snail's pace. I'm not saying this is a negative, by the way, because I actually think it's very important in establishing the movie's tone and how dreamlike everything is meant to be, and it also creates a very intimate and immersive viewing for the first half of the movie. They really take their time building the relationship between Red and Mandy in a very quiet and human way, and then making you feel extremely uneasy when Jeremiah finds his obsession within Mandy before culminating the first half of this story in an incredibly sad way that sets the stage for what's essentially a John Wick movie on cracked LSD. It's only a couple of seconds away from being exactly halfway through the runtime that the scene of Mandy's death fades to black before we pick back up in the aftermath and Red's path of vengeance begins. And While the pacing is extremely slow for that first half, they absolutely deliver on the payoff with the back half of this movie being a high-octane, visually breathtaking, brutal gore fest as Red rips and tears through the children of the New Dawn and the Black Skulls, starting off by forging the Beast, an axe that's shaped like an F in reference to the logo of the band Celtic Frost. But there's another angle that Cosmatos gave to the design of this thing that I absolutely love. I wanted the weapon that he forges himself to crystallize, like a manifestation of his grief and insanity, and not like a real object. More like a mythical artifact that he pulls out of his soul in a way. That's basically the most metal thing I've ever heard, and I think they pretty much nailed it. The weapon has become iconic, and for good reason. The design of this thing is just inherently cool to look at, but when you learn about what the idea behind its strange formation was, it just becomes all the more badass. And seeing Nick Cage forge an axe that's a manifestation of grief and insanity while wearing sunglasses and having heavy distorted guitar blast to accompany the whole thing is just about the coolest thing that will ever happen in cinema. After such a long time of this slow build-up, getting this moment is such a huge injection of adrenaline into your veins, especially since the time spent building their relationship means that by this point you're also probably filled with this sadness and rage, and you want that cathartic payoff, and the movie is going to deliver that in spades. Once Red has his axe in hand, he immediately heads out on the hunt for the people who wronged him, taking them out one by one in brutal fashion, like slitting Fuck Pig's throat with a box cutter. His name is Fuck Pig, by the way. Yes, mixed in with the ethereal beauty and emotionally driven story is a lot of that kind of thing too. Cheddar Goblin is a commercial that plays on TV, and Cheddar Goblin is also what I call my girlfriend, and Fuck Pig is what I call my best friend. This is what real affection sounds like. Anyway, the movie's got a lot of gory goodness on offer with some Mad Max style chase scenes and fun one-on-one brawls, the highlight being a chainsaw v mega chainsaw duel with Nicolas Cage and a demon biker. Take anything cool, add Nick Cage to it, and it's automatically cooler than it already was. Pro tip, you can also add a mega chainsaw to anything and it'll also make it cooler. There is one creative decision in this movie that I'm a little iffy about, and it's that there are a couple of times where these animated sequences will play, sort of recapping the thematic purpose of everything that's happened up to that point, or foreshadowing something that has yet to happen. And while they look cool, they don't really add much to the movie in my opinion, so much so that I forget they're even there every time I watch the movie. Thankfully, it's not to the detriment of anything else, and these sequences are always very brief, but they just feel a bit out of place even within the strange tone of the rest of the movie. One other character I'd like to mention is the chemist played by Richard Brake. This is the dude that gave that tainted batch of LSD to the Black Skulls, and by the look of things, he's maybe been trying out a tad bit of it himself. He's got a tiger named Lizzie, and there's an interaction that I find really funny where Red just looks at him and the chemist says this,
God, you're right.
and just lets Lizzie free.
Bye, Lizzie.
They're so out of their minds in this shit that they're communicating through wavelengths now. I also love this moment where the chemist can just read on Red's face that the Black Skulls took someone very dear to him, and he talks about how terrible that group is before directing Red to the church where the children of the New Dawn reside. Richard Brake is so damn good in everything he's in, and even in this very brief scene with him, he gives such a great performance, especially since it's been a while since Red's seen a somewhat friendly face. Jeremiah's death is probably the strangest scene of the entire movie, which is saying a hell of a lot. At first, he's very confident in himself, but as soon as Red comes at him, he just starts groveling at his feet and offering fellatio.
I'll blow you, man. I'll suck your fucking dick.
It seems like he truly does believe he's imbued with some, like, cosmic brilliance, but as soon as someone reminds him that he's still just flesh and bone, he falls apart.
I carry God's gift in my heart, not you.
This just reminds me of me and my friends getting baked in high school. Red has his revenge when he pops Jeremiah's head open and he leaves the church burning to the ground behind him. He probably looks super badass to anyone on that wild acid trip, but I have a feeling if you're sober, he probably looks a little closer to this.
Sometimes I just want to burn it down. Burn the whole school down to the ground.
The end of the movie is when it's made clear that Red has fully fallen into this strange new world when he hallucinates Mandy sitting next to him as a final goodbye, which is a much nicer image of her than the one he actually had. I think this shot sums up the movie better than any other possibly could, especially with the music, because it's absolutely beautiful and washy and ethereal, but he's also completely soaked in blood and has the most manic look on his face, and yeah, that's pretty much encapsulates this whole thing in one image. Speaking of the music, the score was done by legendary Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson, who unfortunately passed away before the movie released. It was sudden and unexpected, but he's left behind a legacy of some of the most beautiful music I have ever heard, with This final contribution being one of my favorite film scores ever. It's all parts beautiful, aggressive, and haunting, which was something that could be found in a lot of his compositions over the years. The score is a massive reason why this movie's atmosphere is so well realized, and I've honestly listened through the soundtrack album more times than I've actually watched the movie. It's genuinely beautiful. Like, this is something that I listened to in times of hardship to help get me through things. It is a transcendental album to listen to, and it's such a damn shame that Johansson lost his life so early. Rest in peace, man. The final shot of the movie shows a big wide image of this utterly otherworldly landscape that feels like the culmination of everything that was being built up to in the movie's atmosphere, and who really knows where Red's off to next? Headcanon? He's off to Willy's Wonderland to drink grape juice, play pinball, and fuck shit up. So that's Mandy. It's a movie that I've found myself revisiting every once in a while since release because it offers such a uniquely ethereal experience that always feels like I'm waking up from a dream when the credits roll, and with this really solid and intentional pacing paying off in one of the most fun second halves you could ask for, it's a movie that's never not been entertaining to revisit. It's a straightforward story elevated by incredible execution and an insane style that very few other movies have managed. This has now opened up a whole can of worms for me to talk about other Nick Cage movies I love, which is not a short list by any means. But until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.